Forget the shimmering tapestries, the glitter of gold crowns, and the noble portraits that hang in museums. Step closer, past the ceremony, past the pageantry, and the air changes. It's thick, rancid, heavy with the smell of unwashed flesh, rotting food, and smoke trapped in centuries-old stone. The king, draped in furs and velvet, sits upon his gilded throne, a vision of divine authority. But his beard is clotted with grease from last night's feast, his teeth blackened and jagged from years of indulgence. Lice crawl unseen beneath the jeweled circlet on his head, and the ermine trim of his robe writhes with tiny, unwelcome guests. The marble floors beneath him hide cesspits that swell with waste, sending a sour breath through the castle halls. This was not the spotless world of courtly romance. This was a kingdom built on superstition, where water was feared, bathing was rare, and the stench of power was literal. Here, majesty was a mask, carefully perfumed, lavishly adorned, hiding a body as filthy as the streets outside. And once you see past the golden glory, you'll never look at a medieval king the same way again. 1. Filth behind the throne. The shocking truth they never told you. The scene is dazzling, a vaulted hall lined with banners, sunlight catching on gilded crowns and jewel-encrusted swords. Courtiers bow, musicians play, and the air hums with ceremony. But step closer to the throne, and the illusion cracks. The sweet scent of incense barely masks the rancid odor of sweat, unwashed linen, and stale food. The king sits resplendent in ermine and gold, but his fingernails are blackened with grime, his beard matted, his skin flecked with dirt. Tiny movements betray lice crawling in his hairline, fleas darting from his robe's heavy folds. Beneath the polished armor and velvet, the body of the ruler is no cleaner than the lowliest stable hands. In the popular imagination, medieval kings lived like gods, above the filth of their subjects. The truth is far less romantic. Castles were cold, damp, and rank with waste. Courtyards doubled as refuse pits, kitchens spilled grease into walkways, and vermin roamed freely from pantry to bedchamber. The king's grandeur was an illusion maintained through ceremony, not sanitation. The crown, the throne, and the robes were props in a theater of power, a theater that stank. Behind the scenes, the sovereign who could command armies and bend nations to his will could not command the stench rising from his own skin. 2. The bathing taboo. Why kings feared. Water in the medieval world. Water was as much a threat as a cure. Physicians warned that bathing opened the body's pores to bad airs, letting in sickness and death. The belief ran deep. Clean skin might mean a weakened body. Even kings, who could summon the rare luxury of heated tubs and scented oils, often refused immersion for months, even years. Instead, they changed linen undergarments frequently, trusting the fabric to draw out impurities. Herbal infusions and rosewater rinses replaced soap, dabbed on by attendants like holy ointments. To the royal mind, this was not neglect, but wisdom, a defense against disease disguised as ritual. In truth, the fear of water left the body coated in layers of sweat, oil, and dirt, while the heavy fabrics trapped every odor close to the skin. Bathing became a rare spectacle, prepared like a coronation. Laborers hauling water, fires heating great cauldrons, servants guarding the privacy of the sovereign. Most rulers simply avoided it. For all their power, kings embraced the same superstition as their subjects. Better to stink than to sicken. 3. Royal teeth, rotten smiles. The smile of a medieval king could be a thing of horror. Feasts overflowed with sweetmeats, candied fruits, and honey-drenched pastries. Luxuries affordable only to the elite. Sugar, far from a rarity, became a daily indulgence in royal courts. But dental care was crude, and the tools of hygiene were as destructive as the diet itself. Abrasive powders made of crushed bone, salt, or pumice scoured enamel away. Herbal toothpastes were sometimes mixed with honey, ironically feeding decay. Over time, even young kings suffered blackened teeth, abscesses, and constant pain. Chronic halitosis clung to every word, fouling the air of the council chamber. Foreign envoys noted gaps in royal smiles, while jesters mocked monarchs whose speech slurred from missing molars. Extractions were brutal and often avoided. Many endured the agony rather than face the surgeon's iron tools. In a world without anesthetic, the rot remained, hidden behind pursed lips or disguised by darkened powders, to mask discoloration. For all their gold crowns, the crowns in their mouths crumbled. 4. Perfume as armor. In the great halls of medieval power, scent was as much a weapon as steel. Kings, often unwashed for weeks, masked the odor of sweat, grease, and stagnant air with layers of heavy perfume. This was not the delicate fragrance of modern luxury, but a potent, clinging blend designed to overpower filth. Attendants prepared pomanders, ornate, hollow spheres of gold or silver filled with herbs like rosemary, lavender, or sage, sometimes mixed with musk, ambergris, or civet. These were hung from belts, tucked into sleeves, or worn around the neck, releasing a constant cloud of fragrance. In an age when castles reeked of waste, livestock, and damp stone, such scent was a shield, a declaration that the king was untouchable by the stench of the world around him. Yet this aromatic armor never cleaned the skin beneath. It merely cloaked decay, mingling floral notes with the sour tang of unwashed flesh. Perfume became a status symbol, a mark of wealth and refinement, but also an unspoken admission that the king lived in a world where cleanliness was not an expectation, only the illusion of it. 5. Vermin in the crown. Beneath the gleam of gold and jewels, the royal scalp was no sanctuary. Fleas, lice, and mites thrived in the thick, unwashed hair of kings, nesting in beards, eyebrows, and the linings of fur-trimmed robes. Even the crown itself, worn during long ceremonies, could become a host, its padded interior alive with movement. Ermine and velvet, prized for their softness, were also perfect breeding grounds for parasites. Some kings employed discreet tools, carved ivory scratching sticks or fine-toothed combs, kept within reach to relieve the constant itch. In private, attendants picked through hair and fabric, crushing lice between fingernails or brushing them into bowls of vinegar. But vermin were a fact of life, and even the most powerful monarch could not banish them entirely. The crown might glitter under torchlight, but on the skin beneath, the sovereign waged a quiet, endless war against creatures too small to bow. 6. Waste in the palace. The grandeur of medieval castles masked a grim truth. They were built atop their own stench. Plumbing was non-existent, and royal waste was managed much like that of the lowest servant. Chamber pots, even in the king's private chambers, were emptied by hand into courtyards or cesspits. In summer heat, these pits festered, attracting flies and filling the air with a choking odor that seeped through the stone. Some castles had garderobes, primitive latrines built into the walls, with waste dropping into open ditches or the moat below. Yet these too clogged and overflowed, forcing night soil men to shovel out the filth under cover of darkness. Within the palace, refuse from kitchens, stables, and guardrooms mixed with human waste, pooling in corners or washing into drainage channels that led nowhere. Even royal banquets unfolded under this invisible cloud. The splendor of silk banners and gold plate could not disguise the reality. The seat of a king was never far from the smell of his own kingdom's bowels. 7. The food-stained monarch. Royal feasts were spectacles of abundance, but for the kings who sat at the head of the table, they were also exercises in excess. Picture a long oak table groaning under the weight of roasted boar, spitted pheasants, venison pies, and trenchers piled with dripping joints of meat. The king, surrounded by nobles and minstrels, would tear into the meal with his hands, grease coating his fingers and dripping into his beard. Forks were rare and often ignored. Bread served as a plate, soaking up meat juices before being discarded to the dogs or the poor. Between bites, the king might wipe his hands on his robe, the embroidered sleeves absorbing stains of wine, gravy, and oil. Hand-washing was symbolic at best. A perfunctory dip in a communal bowl of tepid, scented water shared by many. Spills were not cleaned promptly. Bones, crusts, and scraps lay scattered on the table for hours, sometimes until the next day's servants clear out. The air in the hall thickened with the mingled smells of food, sweat, and smoke, settling into every fold of the king's garments. By the end of the night, the monarch's appearance was far from the polished image seen at court. He wore his feasts on his sleeves, quite literally. 8. Disease. Behind the curtain. Beneath the velvet robes and gilded crowns, medieval kings often carried afflictions hidden from public view. Poor hygiene created fertile ground for skin infections, boils, rashes, and open sores that festered under heavy layers of clothing. Flea bites turned into inflamed welts, lice spread quickly, and untreated wounds became breeding grounds for infection. Some kings suffered from scabies or ringworm, conditions that were both painful and highly contagious. To maintain the illusion of health and power, these blemishes were concealed beneath layers of cosmetics, from white lead paste to colored powders. Wigs, often powdered and perfumed, hid hair loss or scalp infections, though they trapped heat and sweat, worsening the underlying conditions. Stiff collars and ornate chains covered lesions on the neck and chest, while gloves disguised discolored or swollen hands. In an era without antibiotics, such ailments lingered for months, even years, becoming part of daily life. Court physicians applied herbal poultices or mercury-based ointments, treatments that often did more harm than good. Yet the public rarely saw these realities. The king was presented as strong and unblemished, even when his own body was a battlefield of rot beneath the royal regalia. 9. Clothing never washed. The finery of a medieval king was his armor of authority, brocaded robes, fur-lined cloaks, and embroidered doublets that spoke of wealth and power. But these garments, costly and delicate, were rarely washed. Laundering risked damaging the fabrics, fading the dyes, or shrinking the fine wools. Instead, layers of dirt, sweat, and spilled food accumulated over weeks or months. The inner linings, pressed against the skin, absorbed body oils and odors until they became stiff with residue. To mask the smell, attendants tucked sprigs of lavender, rosemary, or dried rose petals into the folds, or stored garments with pungent herbs and mothballs. The outer layers might be brushed or beaten to remove surface dust, but true cleaning was almost unheard of. In winter, heavy cloaks were worn day after day, absorbing the smoke of hearth fires and the scents of the feasts. In summer, sweat stains darkened the fabrics, and insects sometimes took up residence in the seams. Even ceremonial attire, glittering with jewels, could carry the stale odor of months-old wear. To the medieval eye, this was not neglect. It was preservation. The king's robes were meant to last for years, and cleanliness was sacrificed for longevity. In the process, the garments became silent witnesses to the grime of royal life, the illusion of majesty. The medieval king's power did not rest solely on armies, laws, or gold. It rested on image. Every public appearance was a carefully staged performance, designed to project divine authority and unshakable strength. The throne room gleamed with polished metal and embroidered banners, musicians played courtly airs, and the monarch, draped in silks and crowned in jewels, appeared untouchable. Yet beneath the ceremony lay a far less regal truth, one of unwashed skin, rotting teeth, and garments steeped in months of accumulated grime. The smells of the court, sweat, waste, smoke, were muffled by burning incense and heavy perfumes. Attendants swept the worst filth from sight, but never far from the palace walls. What could not be cleaned was hidden, what could not be cured was disguised. The people who glimpsed their ruler saw only the outer shell, the gold thread, the glittering gems, the carefully styled hair or powdered wig. They were not meant to see the lice comb hidden in a chest, the stained undergarments, or the herbal sachets clutched to ward off the stink of the hall. This was not deception in the eyes of the medieval world. It was necessity. To admit human frailty, to reveal the body's decay, was to risk undermining the divine mystique that held the kingdom together. In truth, the king's majesty was built as much on concealment as on splendor. The illusion depended on distance. Subjects saw him from afar, awed by the spectacle, never close enough to smell the truth. And so the performance continued, feast after feast, procession after procession. A glittering mask that hid a body as mortal and as unclean as any in the realm. The crown shone, even if the man beneath it did not.